Hi class, in this recording we're going to focus on the male reproductive system, the development of male anatomy, the function of male anatomy, and functions of male sexual responses for this chapter's presentation. So let's dive into it and look at the scrotum. As we look at the scrotum, that's one of the external genitalia of the male. The male has the penis, which is external, and the scrotum, which is external. And particularly as we look at the scrotum is going to be a bag of stratified squamous epithelium that's keratinized. And within this sac, or this bag, we're going to have the male gonad contained. Both the male's external genitalia, the penis and the scrotum, are going to be located within the male's perineum. And they're going to be bordered by the pubic symphysis along the superior margin. We have ischial tuberosities, which are going to be, one would be here, the other one's going to be cut off. And then on the posterior margin, we have the coccyx. So we have this large triangular diamond-shaped area, a triangle with this mid-sagittal slice, diamond if we look at a spread eagle view of the male perineum. So here's the diamond view of the male perineum, where we have the pubic symphysis, then we have ischial tuberosities, and then the coccyx. And this area represents the location where the male external genitalia is going to be located. The scrotum itself isn't going to have both testicles at the same elevation. And this is something that, particularly among females, isn't common knowledge. Usually, generally speaking, the left testicle is going to descend lower than the right testicle. And this is a very important structural adaptation. When a male presses his thighs together, he doesn't want his testicles to be crushed against each other. So because we have the left testicle hanging down lower and the right testicle being superiorly elevated to the left testicle, they are less likely to crush against each other. The scrotum has a lot of sebaceous glands or sweat glands associated with it, so it tends to be quite wet, particularly when the male is overheating. It has a lot of sweat buildup on it. It also is going to have particularly dark pigmentation, overly active melanocytes on it, especially considering the small amount of sunlight that the scrotum receives. And as we look at the scrotum, there's a septum that's going to divide the scrotum into left and right components known as the internal median septum. In terms of the visual anatomy of the scrotum, starting at the base of the penis and extending all the way down to the anal opening, there is a line, a ridge of tissue that is called the perineal raphe. And that is one of the embryonic leftovers from when we were developing in utero and had folds of tissue converging on each other. The scrotum itself is also going to contain a spermatic cord, and that spermatic cord within the scrotum primarily is going to serve to carry sperm away from the testicles to the rest of the male reproductive tract. So within that spermatic cord, we're going to have the ductus deferens. We're also going to have, sometimes this ductus deferens is referred to as the vas deferens. We're also going to have the gonadal artery and vein, and the lymphatic vessels, and the testicular nerve. And the spermatic cord is going to go all the way from the scrotum through the inguinal opening into the pelvic cavity. And as it's moving through that inguinal opening, there's an external and internal inguinal ring. These rings sometimes are going to have some malformations associated with them. And if that internal and external inguinal ring of muscle is not connective tissue isn't appropriately formed, a lot of times the male will develop an inguinal hernia because the male will have an exceptionally large inguinal opening relative to the female's inguinal opening. The human testes need to sit in the scrotum because the scrotum is going to be a little bit below body temperature. It's going to be about 35 degrees Celsius. And what we find is that there's optimum sperm maturation at 35 degrees Celsius. If the testicles are consistently heated up to 37 degrees Celsius, sperm production and sperm concentrations within the semen plummet accordingly. So if you are working with a male and that male is struggling with infertility, some common recommendations for that male could include wearing boxers instead of briefs, wear some loose-fitting pants instead of tight-fitting pants, this really isn't a thing anymore, but 15, 20 years ago, people used to play a lot of video games with a hot laptop sitting on their lap. Don't do that. Instead, focus on putting ice packs on the scrotum to help cool off the testicles and optimize sperm development. We also have testes within the male anatomy, and these testes are still going to be covered with the external genitalia, even though they are internal genitalia, just because the testes are within the scrotum. The testes are twofer, they're endo and exocrine. Endocrine in that they make hormones that go into the bloodstream, exocrine in that they make secretions that leave the body. So sex hormones are endocrine, sperm is exocrine. Each individual testes is going to be overall oval in shape. And that's something that females, generally speaking, have a misconception about. Colloquially, the testes or testicles are referred to as the balls. And a lot of individuals just assume that they're completely spherical in shape. That's not necessarily correct. They are more oblong in shape, and they're covered by a thin layer of white connective tissue known as the tunica vaginalis. And they're also going to have the tunica albuginea. So the tunica vaginalis and tunica albuginea work together to cover the testes and help isolate them from the internal environment of the scrotum. And these membranes, the tunica vaginalis and albuginea, also help to anchor the epididymis, which is located up here, to the testes as well. Within the testes, the connective tissues that surround it are going to form septa, or wedges on the inside, that are going to divide it into smaller lobules. As we look at the histology of the testes and zoom in on that, we can see individual tubes. This is a cross-sectional slice of one of the seminiferous tubules. And these seminiferous tubules are where the actual sperm cells are made. And as we look at the seminiferous tubules, we're going to find 1 to 3 seminiferous tubules per lobule of the testes. And lining the seminiferous tubules along the outer perimeter, we have germ cells and nurse cells. The germ cells are going to be constantly dividing to form new sperm. And then in between those germ cells, we have the nurse cells. The goal of the nurse cell is to help the germ cell to make new sperm and help the sperm to have full development, full maturation. We also are going to see clusters of cells in between the seminiferous tubules. Those clusters of cells have been recently renamed the interstitial endocrine cells. But if you're a little crustier like me, you had to learn Leydig cells for that specific cluster of cells in between seminiferous tubules. The Leydig cells are primarily the cell type responsible for producing testosterone within the male testes. As we look at the testes, they also contain what is known as a blood-testes barrier. And this blood-testes barrier is a lot like the blood-brain barrier. It's going to be formed by a bunch of tight junctions. This particular tight junction is going to be between adjacent nurse cells, and it's going to be located around the perimeter of the seminiferous tubule, and is also going to be lining any blood capillaries or blood vessels that may be present within the testes. The purpose of the blood-testes barrier is to keep immune cells from targeting the forming sperm cells. These sperm cells are developing gametes within the seminiferous tubules are going to have a different genotype and consequently are going to express different surface markers relative to the other cells of our body. So they are a good target for our immune cells, and we don't want our immune cells to kill off our own developing sperm. That would be an immune reaction that would render us sterile. That's all we have for this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the genitalia, please feel free to post them on the class discussion board or shoot me an email. And as always, happy studies.